You are listening to Aftersight. This recording is intended solely for individuals who are blind or have low vision.
Thank you for joining us for the Thursday, September 5th reading of the Colorado Sun. My name is Jeannie DeMarinis. Today we will be reading the following main articles. Health. Colorado has had an unusually quiet West Nile season. Scientists want to know why. Followed by environment. Extremely rare California condor killed in Colorado. Wildlife officials offer reward for help finding poacher by Michael Booth. Then outdoors. Revival of nearly 40-year-old whitewater race through Gore Canyon bodes well for contests rebuffed by insurers by Jason Blevins. Then business. More than 15,500 business filings in Colorado deemed fraudulent were made by one guy, by Tamara Chong. Then politics and government. Colorado governor signed special session property tax bill. Conservatives remove measures from November ballot by Brian Eason and Jesse Paul. We will be following up by other miscellaneous articles. News Health. Colorado has had an unusually quiet West Nile season. Scientists want to know why. After last year's booming mosquito population and record-breaking number of West Nile infections and deaths, 2024 has seen only a handful of cases. By John Ingold. In what is normally his busiest time of year, scientist Greg Ebel is feeling something odd this year. He's relaxed. It's been fairly uneventful for the first time in 4 years, he said. Ebel is a professor of microbiology, immunology, and pathology at Colorado State University. His wheelhouse is what are known as vector-borne diseases, in particular diseases transmitted by mosquitoes. For years, he has studied West Nile virus and tracked its patterns through a network of traps in the northern Front Range that search for West Nile's blood-sucking chauffeurs, mosquitoes from the Culex genus. The disease, which mosquitoes pick up by biting infected birds, often passes with few to no symptoms in people. But it can be severe in some people, resulting in neurological damage that can take years to heal from. Even worse, in some cases, it is deadly. Last year, traps across the state overflowed with Culex mosquitoes, sometimes more than 10,000 collected over just a couple of nights. The incredible mosquito boom contributed to the worst West Nile season in decades in Colorado, the worst last year in the entire country. When the season ended, Ebel and other mosquito experts in Colorado worried the giant horde of mosquitoes would overwinter and pop out in spring, ready to keep the disease party going. But that has not happened. Instead, Colorado's West Nile season has been well below average. In data available as of last week, there have been only 30 documented infections of West Nile reported in the state, with 12 hospitalizations and 2 deaths. Compare that to last year's tallies: 634 infections, 386 hospitalizations, and 51 deaths. Ebel said he's seeing similarly low case numbers this year among the birds that his lab tests for the Rocky Mountain Raptor program, and his traps are also mostly bare of Culex mosquitoes. I can't really give you a great answer to why that is, he said. I just don't know. Searching for clues. The weather may have something to do with it. This summer has been much hotter and drier along the Front Range than last year's unusually wet and cool season. Ebel said it's also possible the virus-carrying mosquitoes, gathered in such large number, caught a virus themselves. In his research, he's noticed that the percentage of mosquitoes carrying West Nile has remained about the same. So that means the virus is still out there spreading. It's just that there aren't enough mosquitoes around to spread the disease to that many people. Rather than being frustrated by this mystery, Ebel is taking it as a learning opportunity in trying to better understand West Nile virus even in a down year. 2024 is a data point. I have to admit that I was very surprised that it was as low as it is this year, he said. So I guess what it tells us is that the early season mosquito population is not coupled to last year's late season population. From boom to bust. To Bob Hancock, a professor of biology at Metropolitan State University in Denver, that observation may be the most perplexing finding from this year, how a mosquito boom so quickly turned into a mosquito bust. Hancock's specialty is studying blood-sucking insects, and his enthusiasm for the topic is so great it has led him to being known as Mosquito Man. Hancock has hypothesized that the way the state manages its water supply effectively creates a mosquito factory, even in drought years. There should always be plenty of water, whether in reservoirs or irrigation ditches or around farm fields, for mosquitoes to thrive. But this year is challenging that notion. He said 2024 has reinforced the case for more rain equaling more mosquitoes. It looks to me like that it's rain-driven, especially early rain-driven, he said. It should be noted that Hancock called the sun from a state wildlife area in Weld County where he had taken a group of students to look for mosquito larvae in wetland habitat. He held a long dipper in his hand as he spoke. Hancock said it's possible that Culex mosquitoes are much more selective egg layers than previously known. While there was still plenty of water to be found in ponds and drainages across the state this spring, perhaps the preferred egg-laying sites for Culex mosquitoes were dry. He said it's also possible that all those mosquitoes from last year didn't survive the winter. Maybe a deep freeze or something else zapped them. As he spoke, he began to formulate research ideas to better understand what happened. Then he chuckled and said something he has said many times before when thinking about the ways of the West Nile in Colorado. It's so beautifully complicated. Type of story? News, based on facts, either observed and verified directly by a reporter or reported and verified from knowledgeable sources. News, environment. Extremely rare California condor killed in Colorado. Wildlife officials offer reward for help finding poacher. The poaching further challenges one of the most endangered species of North America after years of recovery struggle. By Michael Booth. Someone shot and killed an extremely rare California condor near McPhee Reservoir in southwestern Colorado this spring, and wildlife officials are now asking for the public's help in tracking down a poacher who eliminated one of the big birds that have been coaxed for decades into rewilding. After avian flu in 2023 hit the complex condor revival program, there are only about 85 of the giants flying through canyons of northern Arizona and southern Utah, with occasional forays into Colorado. About 560 exist now, from Mexico through the Southwest, and the reintroduction efforts recently expanded to the Pacific Northwest. The shot condor was found just a day after it was killed in late March, Colorado Parks and Wildlife officials said Wednesday. The bird's carcass was discovered west of McPhee Reservoir in northeast Lewis, in a remote area. Cortez is the nearest larger town. Colorado and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service have been working leads but made no progress. They hope the public might contribute information about the offender, who could face third-degree felony charges, prison, and $5,000 fines under the Endangered Species Act. Southwest Colorado Parks and Wildlife Public Information Officer John Livingston said the condors crossed over into Colorado only once every few years. The last confirmed crossing of a condor into Colorado was in 2015, but then the condor disappeared from the tracker for a time, raising alarms. It then reappeared alive and well after a tracking device malfunction was resolved, Livingston said. The poached condor was also being tracked by U.S. Fish and Wildlife, as all condors are, and federal agents sent Colorado Parks and Wildlife's Durango office word in March that a tracker had reported no movement in a bird. An officer went to get the given coordinates and discovered the shot condor, Livingston said. There are few excused outs for any condor poacher, he added, a condor being what it is, up to a 10-foot wingspan. They could only be mistaken for a golden or bald eagle, which also cannot be shot. There is no justifiable excuse or mix-up, Livingston said, and even if there were, the shooter is required to report the accident right away. An intricate network of bird rescue operations and zoo breeding, combined with long acclimation and mentoring efforts for fledglings to grow accustomed to the wild, has revived California condor numbers since a low of 22 in the world in 1987. At that time, all the known wild condors were captured and became a captive breeding population. The birds had been in decline since the late 1800s through a combination of sport shooting, easing poisoned mammal carcasses, pesticides, and loss of habitat to development. Releases have restored hundreds to the wild. More than half of the 560 are living free in the southwestern states and Mexico, state officials said. Tipsters can remain confidential, and useful information might lead to a reward, Colorado Parks and Wildlife said. They recommend contacting Colorado Parks and Wildlife, Colorado Operation Game Thief Hotline, 1-877-COLO-OGT, 1-877-265-6648. Email game.thief@state.co.us. Website, submit a tip, or U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service tip line, 844-397-8477. Website, submit a tip. Colorado wildlife officers and enthusiasts take endangered species death hard, Livingston said. Professionals can spend their entire careers raising, releasing, and tracking condors. It's tough when you hear that news, he said. It's a sad story. Type of story: news based on facts, either observed and verified directly by the reporter or reported and verified from knowledgeable sources. News outdoors. Revival of nearly 40-year-old whitewater race through Gore Canyon bodes well for contests rebuffed by insurers. The challenge of liability insurance left the fabled Gore Fest race dormant for 2 years, but an innovative paddler with a unique Class 5 insurance policy revived the contest on the Colorado River. By Jason Blevins. The 68 rafters and kayakers who raced down the Class 5 rapids of Colorado River's daunting Gore Canyon in late August were not just paddling for their lives. They were reviving one of the nation's most storied whitewater races. It's a meeting of the minds of everyone who is really into whitewater, said Conrad Niven, whose Whitewater Racing LLC resuscitated the Gore Canyon Festival and race this year after 2 years of no racing in the steepest stretch of the Colorado River. People were so stoked. So many people were coming up to me and saying, "Thanks. That's such a nice payoff." The revival of Gore Fest, one of the first Class 5 whitewater races in the country, bodes well for competitive whitewater paddlers. The future of racing in difficult whitewater has been clouded in recent years as acclaimed competitions fade away, mostly due to the challenge of securing liability insurance. American Whitewater, which took over organizing the Gore Fest race in 2017, was forced to cancel the 2022 and 2023 races after longtime insurer of the event, the American Canoe Association, announced its underwriter would no longer provide liability coverage for the race. The insurer was willing to write policies for whitewater events on rivers classified as Class 4 or lower. A series of expert-only whitewater races soon followed the Gore Fest race into a terminal hole. The famous Class 5 Tobin Downriver race at California's annual Feather River Festival was canceled in 2022 due to insurer concerns. The Steep Creek Championships on the plummeting Homestake Creek above Red Cliff has drawn the world's top kayakers since its founding in the early 2000s, but has not been part of the GoPro Mountain Games in the last 2 years. The North Fork Championships on Idaho's North Fork of the Payette River first took place in 2012, and the Class 5 race grew quickly into the nation's largest whitewater kayak race, with paddlers navigating through slalom gates in churning Class 4 rapids. But the family-owned North Fork Championship race was canceled in 2023 when operators were unable to insure the race. The Green River Narrows race was created in 1996 and regularly draws more than 150 kayakers who race through Class 5 rapids lined with hundreds of spectators. The Great Falls race on the Potomac River in the Park Service's Great Falls Park just outside Washington, D.C., started in 1988, with kayakers often racing for less than a minute down a stretch of daunting waterfalls. The Great Falls Foundation formed in 2015 to help manage the race, and the foundation last year started hosting the Little White Salmon race on Forest Service land in Washington State, one of the most prestigious kayak races in the world. The Great Falls Foundation, which now organizes several Class 5 whitewater races in Kentucky, Maine, New York, and Mexico, has worked with an insurance provider to craft a policy covering Class 5 whitewater races, and the foundation helped Niven secure a $2 million liability policy for Gore Fest. It was more expensive than the American Canoe Association policy, but it covered everything, and it enabled Niven and American Whitewater to secure a permit for the race from the Bureau of Land Management, which requires insurance for event permits. Niven signed a deal to take over the race from American Whitewater earlier this year. I was like, well, I want to race, and I know my friends want to race, so I really put my neck on the line, said Niven, who competes on the U.S. Open men's national rafting team and teaches snowboarding in the winter for Aspen Snowmass. Racing without scouting rapids. Gorefest was started in the 1980s by the lake kayaking hero Chan Zhuangzi, who founded the pioneering wave sports kayaks in Oak Creek in 1986. The idea of racing through one of the steepest, gnarliest canyons on the Colorado River without stopping to scout rapids was a big deal back then. So were plastic boats. We were just replacing delicate fiberglass crafts in 1980s. When the Gorefest race picked up steam in the 1990s, the race started dividing into different classes, with old-school paddlers competing in fiberglass racing boats and new-school kayakers racing plastic boats. Rafters would race as well. A handful of stand-up paddlers would compete atop what was the predecessor for SUP whitewater crafts. The Grand Junction inventors of the fabled creature craft would roll through the canyon, thrilling spectators. For more than 30 years, the race was the end-of-the-season rally for paddlers from all across the West, and its after-race party at the Pump House Campground was the stuff of legends. Bands would play till late. One time, they set up a charity boxing ring. Companies would set up booths and peddle whitewater gear. Tents and boats packed every open patch of ground. That party is quite a bit tamer these days. The Bureau of Land Management, which manages the campground and river access at the Pump House recreation area, watches over the crowds. The Bureau of Land Management was braced for parking challenges during the festival this year at Pump House, and the event went well, said Josette Morange, the Special Recreation Permit Administrator and Ranger for the Bureau of Land Management's Northwest District Office. I think it's absolutely possible for the event to happen again next year, and I think Conrad has some hopes that the event can grow, Morange said, noting that if Niven's team can continue to, quotes, work within our permitting policies, which includes a requirement for insurance, we can likely facilitate a growing event. Morange said a primary concern for the Bureau of Land Management is making sure the general public still has access to the river and the recreation area during the event. Niven had more than 20 volunteers helping with timing, registration, and most importantly, handling safety at each of the Class 5 rapids along the 9-mile stretch of the Colorado River in Gore Canyon. Finding qualified safety people is a challenge, he said, because the most qualified paddlers are likely racing. Many of the spectators, and there are dozens who paddle Gore Canyon on race day just to watch the action, are also ready to help rescue swimmers. Despite one team, a 2-person rafting crew aptly named Dim-Witted Duo, swimming through just about every Class 5 rapid, no one was hurt in the race. That reflects the, quotes, highly skilled and competent people who showed up to the race, Niven said. There are not many folks who float willy-nilly into Gore Canyon without being prepared for serious whitewater, and only experts race pace paddle through the canyon, where its steepest stretches the river can drop as much as 120 feet a mile. As far as risks go, I would argue this race is not that much more risky than any other event you can offer, Niven said. Charles Thornton, the head of the all-volunteer Great Falls Foundation, has expanded the group's race management role with its one-of-a-kind insurance policy. The group has shifted the burden of liability protection from rafting outfitters to the nonprofit group. We found a couple of brokers who were willing to craft coverage for us and landed on a model that is working for several different races, Thornton said. With all of these policies, you are talking about managing risk, and the policies we have settled on are not really looking at the racers as primary risk. We are more looking at spectators slipping on the shoreline or some kind of damage to property. We don't think of our racers as the highest risk. Over the last several years, the Great Falls Foundation has assembled comprehensive data detailing the risk of Class 5 whitewater races. The database is the first of its kind, and it's helped persuade underwriters to write policies for the races. I'm proud of what we have built, and I think we are providing a good service to our community, Thornton said. It's not perfect, but it's working. Niven and Hattie Johnson, the stewardship director for American Whitewater, who shepherded the Gore Festival for several years, are hoping that the smooth revival of the Gore Fest race last month draws more participants and sponsors next year. Whitewater Racing LLC is planning to offer more races next season. Maybe Niven can start offering cash awards to winners. Maybe a big-name sponsor like Red Bull could step up and help. The Gore race is legendary, he said. It needs to stick around. Type of story, news. Based on facts either observed and verified directly by the reporter or reported and verified from knowledgeable sources. News. Business. More than 15,500 business filings in Colorado deemed fraudulent were made by one guy. The Attorney General's office said the filings linked to one North Glen address were made when filing fees were reduced to $1 at a cost of $765,919 to taxpayers. There could be more. Tamara Chong. The number of new companies created in Colorado in the past 2 years may not have set all-time records after all, after officials discovered more than 15,500 fraudulent business filings last year by a man who used a stranger's home address. The Colorado Attorney General's office on Wednesday filed a consent judgment in Denver District Court to settle allegations against defendant Marcio Garcia Andrade for violating the Colorado Consumer Protection Act. Andrade, who doesn't live in Colorado, was accused of filing the new business formations between February 2022 and August 2023 that were linked to a North Glen townhome address, quotes, without the knowledge or consent of the homeowner and resident, according to the Attorney General's lawsuit. The settlement means that Andrade, who denied all allegations, is barred from filing new business registrations that don't comply with the law. He also must dissolve the 15,660 businesses created at false addresses and pay $75,000 in penalties. Failure to do so means the Attorney General could pursue further penalties. The defendant in this case is being held accountable for his conduct, and my office will continue to pursue those who attempt to defraud the state and harm consumers with false business filings, Attorney General Phil Weiser said in a statement. David Kurt Jabha, the Denver attorney representing Andrade, said his client, quote, did not make any fraudulent business filings and offered Andrade's response to the Attorney General's lawsuit. In a legal filing, Andrade used a registered agent located at the same North Glen address since November 7, 2016, and was, quote, not made aware of the registered agent's change of address and had a good faith belief that they had the consent of the owner or occupant of the home. Mr. Andrade had a contract with a registered agent who resided at the address listed on the filings. However, the agent moved without informing Mr. Andrade before the filings were made. The Attorney General's press release is not accurate and is itself deceptive, Chapa said in an email. Andrade's associate, Rick Steenbach, at Jumpstart Incorporations Incorporated, named in the original complaint, was dismissed from the lawsuit. Registering a business that has no assets or isn't active isn't illegal. Such so-called shell companies fuel the tech company trend of SPACs, or Special Purpose Acquisition Companies, to help startups go public without the usual public offering rigmarole. But creating a business using false information can lead to all sorts of mayhem because it gives legitimacy and a public record, according to the Attorney General's office. It provides a credible Colorado presence for the owner to get a loan, a bank account, patents, and trademarks. Companies can disguise the ownership, conduct real estate transactions anonymously, and hide assets. Fraudulent business filings are dangerous tools in the hands of bad actors. The veneer of legitimacy provided by a registered corporation can be used to deceive consumers into transacting with, including extending credit to, a business that has supplied false information. And if a business filing is fraudulent, a consumer may be unable to contact the business with concerns or legal process, said the Attorney General's complaint. But as an extra kick in the pants to the state business-friendly filing system, Andrade paid less than usual to start a new business. In May 2023, someone at the Secretary of State's office noticed the unusual number of filings linked to the same address, just as a popular discount was about to be depleted. The discount reduced business filing fees from $1 to $1 from $50, and was part of a year-long investment approved by lawmakers to help small businesses recover from the pandemic. About 9% of the $8.4 million in taxpayer funds set aside to cover filing costs allegedly benefited Andrade and Steenbach for a total of $765,919 in credits, according to the lawsuit. The Attorney General's office said 15,433 of Andrade's business filings were made during the fee discount period. Weiser said his office didn't pursue recovering the credits because it wasn't cash that ended up in Andrade's pocket. His team had to weigh the time and cost to go to trial for a civil case. Our clear conclusion is that there was fraud in terms of the registration of these businesses, and all I can say is they agreed with the conclusion that they need to pay $75,000 and they have to dissolve these entities, and if they didn't feel comfortable with that settlement, they could have proceeded to let the case be litigated, Weiser said. Our goal was to stop this fraud and this practice and hold this individual accountable. Both men have had run-ins with federal authorities. In June 2019, a federal court froze the assets of Grand Teton Professionals, a Wyoming LLC, behind an alleged credit repair scheme that, quotes, built consumers out of at least 6.2 million, according to the Federal Trade Commission. Andrade was named as a defendant, as was Adamium Corp., a Colorado company where Steenbach was president. The Colorado Attorney General's lawsuit said Andrade didn't have a primary residence in the state, making him ineligible to be a registered agent here. Steenbach has a Parker address. Andrade is also linked to Wholesale Shelf Corporation, which profits by selling, quotes, shelf corporations or registered businesses with no activities that are resold so someone new can skip the regular business startup process. On Tuesday, Wholesale Shelf had nearly a dozen Colorado Shelf corporations listed for sale for $10,000 to $15,074. Many have the same North Glen address. After noticing the link to the same North Glen address on May 10th, 2023, the Secretary of State's office also linked Andrade and Steenbach to the filings using data logs of foreign IP addresses as well as the same payment method. Local economists and the Secretary of State had credited the temporary fee discount for the rise in new business filings during the period the fee was in effect. Filings hit record highs each quarter before the funding ran out. First quarter 2023 reached an all-time quarterly record of nearly 56,000 new companies. Previously, new business filings rarely rose above 40,000 a quarter, as seen in the chart below. But there's a good chance that some of the data could be rolled back. The Secretary of State's office, however, declined to comment on the latest case and did not share details how fraud has impacted past quarters. I don't think it really means anything for the real economy because a new entity filing is a prelude to activity, said Brian Lewandowski, Executive Director of the Business Research Division at the University of Colorado's Leeds Business School. However, if fraudulent activity is in excess of normal, then the series of losses some predictive power as leading indicator of the real economy. Why there's fraudulent business filings. Authorities have been aware of business fraud for years. In 2022, the Secretary of State's office supported Senate Bill 34, which created a process for victims of business identity theft to complain about fraud and have complaints investigated by the Attorney General. If determined fraudulent by a judge, the Secretary of State must mark the business record as, quotes, fraudulent or unauthorized. The office's Fraudulent Business Filings Working Group met for about 5 months in late 2022 and early 2023 to hash out guardrails later adopted into law. During a session in December 2022, Working Group member Greg Wirch, a Denver-based special agent with the Department of Homeland Security's Homeland Security Investigations, shared examples of how shell companies move assets to avoid paying taxes. Sometimes it's legal, like in Delaware, where many companies chose to incorporate due to low business taxes. But worse than evading taxes are the scammers behind shell companies that decimate victims financially, like pig butchering scams that use flattery to romance the lonely and get them to transfer over their life savings or cause physical harm. Wirth said he had a counterfeit specialized bike helmet that would break into 1,000 pieces if he jumped on it. This is the kind of stuff that these shells are importing into our country and that our parents and friends are buying on the internet, thinking they have real products. It is a real issue to real families in our state, Wersch said. Counterfeit medications we've seized. We have airplane parts, car parts, airbag safety gear, and so much more is being imported by these shells. He pulled up a list of more than 80 companies registered in Colorado with United Nations in their name. I talked to the United Nations. None of these entities are part of the United Nations. None. Yet all of these entities are here. Why do you think that is? Why do you think people are incorporating the Children's Fund United Nations here in Colorado? You think they might be taking money from the people who they think they're donating to the UN's Children's Fund, which might be the real thing, he said, pointing to the United Nations Fraud Alert page. It's likely. In a local case, Wersch said a young woman had difficulty selling her townhouse because pallets of bathroom products, including giant boxes holding toilets, bathtubs, and appliances, would arrive daily at her home. They were customer returns sent back to the company's corporate address. This woman's house was the corporate address for the company, Wersch said. Doing more investigation, there's a lot of fraud involved with this company, and many companies registered the exact same address within minutes of this company being registered here in Colorado. This is an example of a Colorado illicit shell that has no place in our state, should not be allowed to be registered. We should not be collecting money from them. Business fraud complaints growing. Since then, some changes were made to the business filings in Colorado. Victims can now file a complaint with the Secretary of State's office if a business used their name or address to register or change an existing business information without the owner's consent. Law enforcement can also file a complaint directly with the office, which wasn't allowed before the new law. As of August 20th, the agency said 2,208 reports of fraudulent businesses have been filed, and 1,004 were referred to the Attorney General's Office for Investigation, said Jack Todd, a spokesperson for the Secretary of State. Another 816 cases were resolved and the business records updated. Approximately 286 were rejected because they fell out of the office's scope. 42 were pending an initial review, and 9 had no violation or evidence of fraud. If the subsequent investigation determines that there is evidence of fraud, the Secretary of State's office then redacts victim information and flags the record in our business database as suspected fraudulent activity, Todd said in an email. Rules went into effect August 7th that prohibit registered agents from using a P.O. box as their address. Businesses that dissolve or are late in their paperwork also can't easily refile after a certain number of years unless they show proof of ID and an affidavit. Some of the rules have yet to begin, such as requiring registered agents to have a Colorado driver's license or state identification card. That doesn't go into effect until July 1st, 2025. But without the law, the Attorney General's office said it couldn't as easily pursue action to shut down fraudulent businesses or pursue penalties unless it used the Consumer Protection Act. With the beefed-up law enforcement agencies can now file a complaint about fraudulent business directly with the State Department instead of relying solely on victims. This story was updated to an additional comments from the Attorney General and the defendant's lawyer. Type of story: news based on facts, either observed and verified directly by the reporter or reported and verified from knowledgeable sources. News, politics, and government. Colorado governor signs special session property tax bill. Conservatives remove measures from November ballot. The bipartisan measure, House Bill 1001, cuts property taxes modestly for residents and some businesses and puts limits on how fast they can grow in the future. By Brian Eason and Jesse Paul. Declaring an end to Colorado's property tax wars, for now, at least, Governor Jared Polis on Wednesday signed into law a round of modest tax cuts passed during the August special legislative session to avoid the threat of far deeper cuts on the November ballot. In exchange, political groups Advance Colorado and Colorado Concern rescinded two ballot measures. Initiatives 108 and 50, which would have cut taxes by $2.4 billion, put strict limits on their growth, and jeopardized the state's ability to fund K-12 schools and other public services for years to come. This really is an example of bringing folks together who may not see eye to eye on every issue, Polis said in his office at the state capitol. Legislative Democrats and local government officials across the state hoped that the special session deal would bring an end to the years-long political tug-of-war over property taxes. Since voters repealed the tax-limiting Gallagher Amendment in 2020, taxes have climbed at historic rates due to rising home values. Those increases helped the state fully fund K-12 schools for the first time since the Great Recession, but squeezed household budgets while the state's cost of living has risen rapidly. The legislature passed a number of temporary tax cuts to mitigate their rise in recent years, but it wasn't enough to satisfy conservative groups outside the Capitol. Conservative political nonprofit Advance Colorado and Colorado Concern, a coalition of business executives, used the threat of the ballot measure to force lawmakers back into the negotiating table to pass additional tax cuts in the special session. Today, Colorado taxpayers are the winners, Michael Fields, the president of Advance Colorado, said in a statement. Our goal over the past 2 years has been to solve the state's property tax crisis through a significant and permanent property tax cut and an enforceable cap to prevent future tax spikes. Coloradans across the political spectrum have made it clear that they need substantial and meaningful property tax relief. In a deal negotiated with a small group of legislators before Polis called the special session, lawmakers agreed to pass additional tax cuts in exchange for Fields removing the measures from the ballot. He did so around 10 a.m., a few hours before Polis signed the bill into law. The bipartisan measure, House Bill 1001, cuts property taxes for residents and some businesses by about $255 million statewide starting in the 2025 tax year. It also puts limits on how fast property taxes can grow in a bid to prevent large spikes like the one Coloradans experienced in the 2023 tax year for taxes paid this year. Colorado's property tax deal. In the special legislative session, Colorado lawmakers passed House Bill 1001, part of a deal to enact further tax cuts in exchange for conservative groups pulling initiatives 108 and 50 off the November ballot. For the tax year 2025, here's how the deal compares to the ballot measures and Senate Bill 233, which was signed into law earlier this year. Residential tax rates, school districts, previous law, 7.15%. Senate Bill 233, 7.15%. Ballot measure, 5.7%. House Bill 1001, 7.05%. Residential tax rates, local governments, previous law, 7.15%. Senate Bill 233, 6.4%. Ballot measure, 5.7%. House Bill 1001, 6.4%. Business tax rates, commercial and agriculture. Previous law, 29%. Senate Bill 233, 25%. Ballot measures, 24%. House Bill 1001, 25%. Business tax rates, industrial and other. Previous law, 29%. Senate Bill 233, 29%. Ballot measures, 24%. House Bill 1001, 26%, 25% in 2027. Statewide property tax revenues have jumped around 20% after home prices jumped in the wake of the pandemic, state data shows. In the future, school district property tax growth would be limited to 12% statewide over every 2-year assessment cycle, or 6% annually, while local governments would be limited to 10.5% every 2 years. Local voters, however, can override the limits in their own cities or special districts. Tax bills vary greatly by where someone lives and what their house is worth. But for the typical Denver homeowner with a house worth $700,000, House Bill 101 will amount to around $70 in annual savings. Since 2020 and the repeal of the Gallagher Amendment, unpredictability has burdened our state's property tax system. State Senator Barbara Kirkenmeyer, a Brighton Republican, said at the bill signing ceremony, "The people of Colorado deserve certainty." Added to the $1 billion tax cut the legislature already approved in May, the cuts are still a far cry from what the ballot measure proposed. Initiative 108 would have cut local and school property taxes by $2.4 billion, with an unclear directive that the state replace much of the lost revenue. While the state is constitutionally required to fund schools, the reimbursements for local governments may not have been enforceable. That section of the law was scheduled to be repealed before the ballot measure requirement would have taken effect, according to the legislative analyst. Over the long term, Initiative 50, a constitutional amendment limiting statewide tax growth to 4% annually, may have had an even larger impact, threatening local governments' abilities to issue debt for new development. Local government officials have generally opposed statewide property tax cuts, saying those decisions should be made at the local level. But many local officials say they were willing to live with the cuts in House Bill 1001 in order to avoid the risk of deeper cuts in November. While the measure passed with wide bipartisan support, not everyone was on board with the deal. Progressives criticized the tax cuts as a boon to wealthier homeowners, while some conservatives argued they didn't go far enough. Even some supporters of the deal balked at the process, complaining that wealthy political groups shouldn't be able to bully lawmakers into passing tax cuts using ballot initiatives as leverage. It is unfortunate that we had to play defense, that we had to come forward and provide yet additional relief because wealth interests in the state continue to bring forward ballot measures that would ultimately undermine the stability of communities. House Speaker Julie McCluskey, Democrat Dillon, said at the bill signing ceremony. But McCluskey said she hopes the compromise will end the property tax conversations for at least the next 6 years. Field said Advance Colorado and Colorado Concern wouldn't bring similar measures forward in that period, so long as future lawmakers don't go back on their deal. Type of story: news based on facts, either observed and verified directly by the reporter or reported and verified from knowledgeable sources.
If you enjoyed this program, please register for our free services at www.aftersight.org or by calling 303-786-7777.